All right, we're at 5 after, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So you can look me up on the BCBA website, bacb.com. My credentials are down here at the bottom to see who I am, what I do. Tonight we're going to be starting the first part of our intensive set of classes for behaviors that are more persistent, that kind of stick around. Once you do some little things, you don't get a whole lot of response. But these are for your things that are more persistent and you can't seem to quite figure out. You have the opportunity to participate in this class and kind of have your own case study. We'll go through plenty of examples. If anytime there are any questions, please feel free to jump in. It's your opportunity to ask anything you want to ask. So here we go. We're talking about behavioral data collection. There are 4 physical dimensions of behavior, and we're going to go through each one of these extensively: frequency, duration, latency, intensity. So let's jump in about frequency. Here we go. All right, frequency. Pretty simply, frequency is just the number of times the target behavior occurs. It's basically a count of what's happening. And we can count that in different ways depending on the environment and what we have and how quickly it's occurring or how often it's occurring. A lot of times when we're doing behavior, we just use tally marks. Just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a real easy pen, pencil, paper way to keep up with how many times something is happening. We also do mechanical counters, which are things like if you've ever been to a big event, as you pass through the entryway, somebody might click. They're keeping count with a clicker. There are definitely times when those are necessary, when something is occurring at a super high rate, right? A super high frequency. It's like so fast that you really can't keep up with it. Those are really nice to have. I've seen different times where I've had kids I had a kid one time who was making this screaming noise, and it was happening so often that there was no way they could tell if what they were doing was changing it. And so they needed a really accurate count of how often it was happening. But there was no way to just like tally it. It was too much. It ended up being like 80 times a minute or something like that. So it was literally like, oh, click, click, click. So the other thing is sometimes people can use tokens. I've seen this happen with like maybe somebody's teaching and they want to keep track of something that's happening, but they don't really want to go write it down, and it's not happening so much that they have to have a counter or something like that. They might just like put a handful of beans in one pocket, and every time it happens, they might move a bean to the other pocket. And that whenever it's done, they're like, oh, how many times was that? 7 beans. Got it. So you can definitely use tokens to keep a counter spot. So frequency is just that simply the number of times the target behavior occurs. Duration is when we're talking about the amount of time a behavior occurs, the amount of time that it lasts from beginning to end. We're talking about elapsed time. And so there are several different ways to track elapsed time. Obviously, a stopwatch if you know you're timing something, which I hope that if you're doing duration, and we're going to go deeper into these, this is just a little intro. Use a stopwatch if you have one. If you have that feature on your phone or whatever, that's great. But sometimes you're in a position where you may not be able to even grab a stopwatch. You might just literally be looking up at the clock. And if it's digital, you can track the minutes. And if it's analog and it has a second hand, you might even notice, okay, this is where it is in seconds or something like that. And so it might be a matter of like, okay, it's 12:15 now. This happens, this happens, this happens. Okay, it's 12:18. How long did that last? 1, 2, 3 minutes. Got it. Right. So you can use a clock to find that elapsed time or duration, or a timer. If you're timing a specific duration, which sometimes you can, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you might want to use something that's I'm timing this for 5 minutes, and how much does it happen, right? So that's duration, just how long something lasts. Latency is a little different than duration, but sometimes people get it confused. Latency is the time it takes for the behavior to occur after the verbal cue or the event. So basically, a request is made, and then there's a delay there between when the request is made and the action begins. Please have a seat. And then the kid stands for 5 or 6 or 7 seconds before they sit. That's what we're talking about. The time between when the demand was given and the action was taken, right? Is the delay, is the latency. You would use the same sort of tools as you would for durations. You can use your stopwatch, your clock. A timer is not the best because you're dependent upon the person giving the action. Like, the latency is a little different. You can say a duration is this time amount. So you can use a timer for that, but latency is a little tougher. The time between. Intensity is the force or the magnitude with which a behavior occurs. The thing about intensity is you pretty much have to create intensity scales, right? Which are sort of arbitrary scales. They become reference points on a defined spectrum, and they're often defined by effect. What do I mean by all of that? When we start to talk about intensity scales, we have to use language. We'll go to the next one. We have to use language that is subjective, but it gives us a frame of reference so that we can describe what's happening, or that we can track what's happening, or we can see if the intensity is getting greater or smaller, which is all dependent upon the scale that we create, right? So when we're talking about creating an intensity rating scale, first of all, we need to know what the target behavior is, and we're gonna walk through this one a little bit, and then we'll circle back around. So for the intensity rating scales, I want to be clear, you're making this up, or the team is making this up, or whoever is tracking this behavior is making this up. You can go out there and you can get some behavior rating scales, but what I'm talking about is if you're in a real life situation and you're trying to deal with a student or a child, or your own child, you're a parent, you're a caregiver, you're not out there pulling a doctor's rating scale, to see if what's happening with your kid is somehow defined on this scale and if you can figure it out. You're literally making up a scale for yourself that applies to what's happening with your kid. And so I'm going to walk you through an example if this is what's happening with your kid, right? Let's suppose that your kid is hitting someone. They're hitting another person. So that's the target behavior. That's what I'm looking for. Well, I want to define that in a way that lets me talk about intensity. And so I need to really qualify the descriptors that I use when I talk about it. And so then I start to think, okay, what does it look like when someone's hitting? What are some questions I might want to know? I might want to know, are they hitting with an open hand? Right? I might want to know, are they hitting with a closed hand? Are they hitting with a fist? I might want to know, are they hitting so loud that I can hear it across the room? Another person, right? Are they hitting another person so loudly that I can hear it across the room? Is it loud enough that I can hear it in the next room? Are they hitting hard enough that it leaves a pink mark that disappears in a few minutes? Right? Are they leaving hard enough to leave a bruise that lasts 2 to 3 weeks? That sort of thing. When I talk about how it's often defined by the effect, that's what I mean with intensity scale. Sometimes it's not just defined by the actual behavior itself, but the effect that the behavior leaves behind. Hard enough to leave a bruise. That's an effect from the hitting. Hard enough to leave a hole in the wall. That's an effect from the hitting. So when you talk about intensities, they often are defined in terms of the result or what came from the hitting. Okay. We'll take this sort of language, and I'll take you one more step into putting it into that scale. Let's move this down just a little, or maybe not. Okay. So if I were to create a scale from just the language we were just talking about, this might be my scale on a scale of 1 to 5. And this scale, obviously, this is coming from I'm actually seeing the behavior. I'm actually looking at it and being like, oh, okay, this would be, I can make this into a scale because I can see a range of intensity and I want to be able to track it, right? So how can I put this in the scale? So 1 might be a 1 on the scale, and you might say the scale is 1 to 5, 1 being the least, 5 being the greatest of intensity. And here's what my scale looks like. 1, hits with an open hand, barely heard or inaudible maybe, leaves no mark, right? These scales are arbitrary. You might not, and you might go, well, they had an open hand, but I heard it, but it didn't really leave a mark. That's going to be a 1. You see how it doesn't have to be exactly what you define, but you say, okay, is it closer to 1 or 2? Hits with an open hand, heard it, but leaves discolored skin. Well, it didn't even leave a mark somehow, but I really heard it. So like, right? So you're trying to figure out where on the scale each event happens. Each time there's hitting, where is it on the scale? And so continuing on, you can see how it elevates, it escalates. The next one is they're still hitting with an open hand. They can hear it within the room, but it leaves a clear mark and there's possible bruising. I'm creating my scale based upon the effect of the behavior as opposed to upon the behavior itself, right? Can I hear it in another room? That's an effect. The hitting with the open hand, the hitting with the closed hand, that's the behavior. But I need to quantify it in some way or qualify it in some way into a scale that I can now work with. And so then keep going. Obviously, 4, you're hitting with a closed hand, heard within the room. And this can be like whatever works for you. I just made this up. You're actually in this position. You're actually dealing with this behavior. You're asking yourself, okay, what does this look like with my kid? Is there something else? Is it they're hitting on bare skin? Are they hitting on the other person's bottom? Are they hitting on the other person's head? Right? You can look at these different things and put them into your scale, because the scale is something, again, that you are literally making up to give yourself a frame of reference. And that frame of reference down the line, when we get down to that place, a few classes down, where we're talking about how to change these behaviors, if you're really concerned about intensity, like, right, and you want to know, that might be the thing that changes. Maybe the frequency of something is still staying the same, and you're like, I'm making no difference, but I'm noticing that now they're just kind of pretending to hit, right? They're just kind of this, whereas it used to be this. That's intensity. And if that's something I need to track, I need to know how to do that, because once I'm making a change, I might not know right away. If I didn't create an intensity scale, I might not know that the thing that we did to support the behavior and to put in a new replacement behavior was working if I don't have some kind of scale. But I can look back at my data that I collected, over this 2-week period, and I can say, okay, I see here that we used to be a whole bunch of 4s and 5s on the scale, but now we're a whole bunch of 1s and 2s with just an occasional 3 or 4. That lets me know that we're actually making progress, as opposed to I might just be like, oh, well, I had 27 times this week, and I have 27 times this week, and I have 27 times this week, so there's no change. But I noticed that the intensity's dropping, right? So this is just a way to, even though it's arbitrary, it's an incredibly valuable way to collect data. Any questions on that? All right. We might be a little short class tonight if I give you a ton of information. All right, the 4 types of data collection almost follow exactly the 4 types of data, right, that we're talking about. There are actually a lot more than 4 types of data collection, but these 4 are really the ones that we use for real life situations in school systems, real life situations in homes, community. We're really looking at these 4 right here. So we're looking at frequency, event, and rate recording, duration recording, latency recording. I know that you noticed those first three are incredibly similar to the types of data we just talked about. And then the last one is ABC data collection, and that's where we'll spend a chunk of our time. But let's talk about frequency, event, and rate recording. So this is best for behaviors that are occurring regularly. If you want to, if you hear yourself saying this all the time, when somebody says, you're saying, oh, so-and-so is hitting, so-and-so is refusing to do this, so-and-so is making a mess, so whatever. How often is it? All the time. They do it all the time, right? Well, nobody does anything all the time except maybe breathe, and even that is intermittent. So we have to get a little more specific, and we can do that by doing some frequency / event and rate recording. The thing about when it includes event, it just means that it can be a set time that you're doing, or it can be an event that's happening that you're catching the frequency of. So during swim practice is an event. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. is a time interval, right? And so you can catch frequency by a specific time or by a specific event, but they have to have a distinct beginning and ending. If you're not sure when the thing started and you're not sure when the thing ended, you can't make a rate for an unspecified amount of time. Okay, so even if that event is, oh, it's swimming, I need to know what time it started and what time it ended. Otherwise, I won't be able to find my rate. Okay, so you're basically going to record those occurrences over time or throughout the event. And again, you're going to use tally marks if you have paper and pen. You're going to use a mechanical counter of some sort if it's at that such a rate that you need to do that. Yeah, or you're going to use like the tokens. That's the least that I see. A lot of times when I see even teachers who typically have they're teaching a whole class and they can't necessarily grab a clipboard and do the things. If we're at a place where it's some pretty intensive behaviors is happening, there's probably a second person in there to help with the data collection. If there's not, then they're going to have to use a counter or they're going to have to use some kind of tokens. I've only given a teacher a mechanical counter twice. And the first time I gave the teacher the mechanical counter, basically the kid was he was getting out of his seat. And a lot, and some other things. But anyway, there was no way. It was disruptions. That's what we remarked. We were tracking how many times he disrupted the teacher speaking, right? And there was no way for her to track it with paper and pencil and teach, right, at the same time. And so we just gave her a counter because it was happening so often. And it ended up being like 67 times an hour or something. It was more than once a minute, right? But the way we found that was like we took times, right? We're saying, okay, we're going to track this from, and she had a clicker. We actually chunked the day so that we would have an idea, and we did event recording, but they had specified beginning and ending times, and we did like reading, math, encores, which are your PE, gym, library, music, art, all of your extra your specials. Some people call them specials, encores. They're called all sorts of different things. But we tracked them throughout these times. And so it might be that reading lasted 90 minutes. And so we might have had 8 to 9:30 reading. We knew that was the event, and she tracked those things. And maybe it was, I want to do some easy math. Maybe it was 180 times, right? In that 90-minute period. And so you would take the frequency, which was 180, and you divide it by 90, which was the duration of the time, and you end up twice a minute, right? If it's twice a minute, it's happening. If you want to move that, it's happening 120 times an hour. Okay, that's how you would find the frequency. That's how you would find the rate for reading. But it might have been that we saw that in library. Maybe library was only 30 minutes, right? And so I need to know the rate. This is like the importance of why you need the rate, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, it happened 100 times in reading, okay? But it only happened 20 times in library, right? I need to know the rate. I need to know that in reading, there was 90 minutes, but in library, there was only 30 minutes, you know? And so if I take that rate in reading like we just did, but now I look at library and I'm like, okay, it's 30 minutes and it happened 15 times in 30 minutes. If I double that, right, it's happening 30 times an hour, as opposed to reading, which it was happening 120 times an hour, right? I need the rate so that I can make those comparisons like that when the time is variable, but I'm looking for a certain behavior. You know, maybe I am looking for hitting, and I can see that in PE, hitting is happening, and I say, oh, I'm watching PE. It happened 8 times in an hour. It's happening 8 times an hour, right? Guess how much is happening in reading? None. Why? Because they're sitting in a desk by themselves. But, right? All right, but so now I'm like, okay, recess. Oh, well, dang, it was happening this many times at recess, but how long is recess? If PE was an hour, but recess is only 15 minutes, and happens 7 times an hour in PE, if it happens 7 times in PE and 7 times in recess, I'm like, okay, they're about the same, until I realized that PE is an hour. And so 7 times an hour in PE, but recess is 15 minutes times 4, 28 times an hour in recess, right? You got to go all the way to the rate when you're doing this sort of frequency recording. What I see time and time again is that people are counting how many times it happens, but they're not taking that next step to the rate, and it's just misrepresenting what's actually happening. This kind of recording is incredibly beneficial for tracking really subtle shifts in responding. Like I said, if you have something that's happening 120 times an hour, it's happening all the time. How do you feel like? All the time. Guess what? If you apply something to that to change it, and it drops to 100 times an hour, guess what? It feels like it's happening all the time. You don't feel the change. When something is happening 120 times an hour, it drops to 100 times an hour. You don't feel that change. It still feels all the time. But if you're doing actually frequency and rate recording, and you can see, oh, look, last week it was happening 120 times an hour. This week we're at 100 times an hour. Let's keep doing what we're doing. It's going the way we want it to go. Oh, now it's at 80 times an hour. Guess what? It still feels like a lot until you really get down to like, okay, now it's 30 times an hour, right? Now it's 20 times an hour. If it just went from 120 to 20, I would know that right away. But a lot of times it actually doesn't do that. It starts to move slowly at first. And what we'll do is we'll give it a couple weeks. We won't feel the movement that we need to feel, and then we'll give up and we'll try something else. This is the importance of data collection, okay? This is the importance of knowing where you start so that you can tell you're making changes. You can tell you're making a difference. You can tell that something you're doing is causing a shift in responding, right? Or even if it's happening 120 120 times an hour. Now it's happening 140. Now it's happening 160. You might not feel that. You might just feel like, it's still happening. I need to know if it's shifting in some direction. All right, duration recording, right? Follows along with duration data. We're talking about elapsed time. Why would we perhaps why would we want to know how long something lasts, right? So let's say that I've got some frequency data, and somebody comes in and they're like, yeah, this kid was, they got out of their seat and they rolled around on the floor 10 times in my class yesterday. Okay, great. But then you find out, then you start asking, you're like, well, how long were they on the floor? Oh, they're on the floor like 30 minutes each time. I was like, so basically 5 hours of their day, they're on the floor. That's a lot different than if you say to me, oh, they're on the floor maybe 2 seconds. Oh, so 20 seconds of their day, they're on the floor, right? Duration matters. Sometimes it really matters when it comes to behaviors. Okay, so duration recording also can be used to more accurately track behaviors that are fast or variable. If you've got something that's like, whoa, crazy clicking, right? Or if they're doing something at such a rate that you can't identify the beginning and the end of that behavior, you want to talk about a duration. Instead of saying, they screamed 12 times in my class, it might be, they screamed for 5 continuous minutes, as opposed to being there with a clicker or a tally trying to figure out when the scream began and ended. You know, right? You're like, okay, 3. How many times did they scream? It would be better to be like, they screamed for this amount of time, right? Or they were out of their seat. This kid got out of their seat 30 times yesterday. But then you find out they're only out of their seat 1 to 3 seconds. Okay, that's a whole lot different than this kid got out of their seat 5 times, but they were out of their seat for 15 minutes each time, right? So if you only look at frequency, you miss a lot. It's actually great to pair these two together. If you compare frequency and duration, if you have the ability to go to that next level of data collection, and you can actually put the duration on there, how long something lasts, the beginning and the end, that's great. And this is all you have to do. You want to note the time that it starts, you want to note the time that it ends, and you want to calculate the elapsed time. Elapsed time can be tricky to calculate. I personally prefer to use a stopwatch if you have it. Use your timer on your phone if you have it. If you can glance at the clock real quick, and we're talking about seconds, right? But anything more that like rolls into, if now you're like, okay, well, this behavior started at 12:08 p.m. and it ended at 1:17 p.m. right? Now you're like, okay, wait, I got the hour and I carry the thing and the subtraction, and right now you're in a different place. Just time it if you can time it. But if you can't, it's fine. It's fine, but just be cautious in your calculations. The thing about duration recording is that the start and the end time are really dependent upon the target behavior, right? It's not like once the behavior starts, the timer starts. Okay, so that's very important. Once the behavior ends, the timer ends. So it also needs to know, you need to know it just started. You need to know it just ended. You have to be so clear in your identifying the target that you know it began and when it stopped, when it began and when it stopped. Okay, I make a point on that because a lot of times it gets confusing when we roll into latency recording, which, right, we talked about duration, we talked about latency. There's these subtle differences. when we talk about latency, it's the delay between the request and the target behavior, right? That request can come in several different ways. It can be a verbal request. You can just straight say, hey, I need you to blah, blah, blah. Can you come here? Come here, right? If I say, this is a good one. I just spent a couple of weeks with my niece who's 2 years old. She is a pro at ignoring and having a huge latency between the request and when she actually does the thing, right? And so you might say, come here, and she's just like, she doesn't laugh at you, but she just pretends like she didn't hear you, right? And then eventually she comes. That's the latency between I asked you to come here and then you actually did it. Is it 20 seconds? Is it 30 seconds? Is it 5 minutes? I just was doing a case on a kid who he had a 20-minute latency between when the request was made and when he started doing it. He would just kind of get lost in time and 20 minutes would go by. That's a huge latency, right? Those requests can also be silent signals. If there's a gesture, if you're a teacher and if you're a teacher, use silent signals. Please use silent signals, especially if you're a classroom teacher, please use silent signals. If you're a parent, it's great to teach silent signals. That is basically, can I teach you hand gestures that stand for a request, right? So I know schools that will teach silent signals for their whole school, because then when they're in the auditorium or they're in the cafeteria and all the kids are sitting on the floor or all the kids are like, "Rrr," they just like, I knew a school that the name of their school started with a W. And so they just taught this as a silent signal because it was a W. And whenever they just held this up, everybody knew to go silent. It was a signal to be silent. It wasn't a signal to do something else. It was a silent signal to be silent, right? And so they would put it up and a couple of kids would see it and they would put it up and then other kids would see it. And before you knew it, within a matter of seconds, an entire cafeteria would be silent. And nobody had to yell. Nobody had to do anything, but literally one adult just went, right? Because they taught it and they reinforced it. That's a silent signal. Silent signals don't have to mean, hey, here's a signal to be silent. They can, in class, when our kids raise their hand, they're giving a signal that says, I would like to speak. That's a silent signal that we're teaching our kids. Raise your hand if you want to be called on, if you want to turn to speak. But it could be stuff like, let's say you're working on the bathroom or something with the kid. A lot of kids will do the T, the sign language, like bathroom, T, toilet, right? That's a silent signal. Anything that you can hold up that's silent. It can be a gesture. It can be a card. This might be like, this is the thing that stands for put your head down. Like it could be anything, right? As long as it's a silent signal that you're giving. It can be, probably all of you have seen the lights will get flashed. If you like turn the light off and on, that's a silent signal for attention or for whatever you've designated it for, or put your attention on me. Those are all silent signals, okay? Latency is the time between you give the prompt, whatever the prompt is. Did you give a vocal? Did you give the switch of the lights? Did you give the silent signal? Like whatever the prompt is, then how long did it take for the person to respond? Right? And so the difference between the duration recording and the latency recording is that the latency recording, the start time is dependent upon the prompt, whereas the duration recording, the start time was dependent upon the target behavior. When the behavior started, the timer started. On this one, when the request is said, the timer starts, the stopwatch starts. When the person exhibits the request, when they give you the target behavior, the timer ends. Okay, it's the time between the request and the response. Come here. 5 seconds, got it. Okay. A big thing for latency, obviously, it's you will know when you need latency recording. Okay. It's not one of those where you're like, should I use frequency recording here? Should I use duration recording here? You know when you need latency recording. If you're asking your child to do something and they're not doing it, and they like eventually do it, but there's a big pause, or they just kind of stare off, it's time to look at latency between when I made the request and when I get the compliance. Like, when do I get the response? And just like we were talking about with duration, that time between matters. You know, if you're like, yeah, they're doing what I asked them to do, but they're doing it. Okay, and let's say I'm a teacher. They're doing this case I had. They're doing what I asked them to do, but they're literally starting when everyone else is finishing. And so they never quite get complete, or they miss out on instruction, or, right? Or you're like, yeah, I asked my kid to put his dishes in the dishwasher, but he did it 2 days later, right? That latency is too long. You know, you can't just go with like, well, they did it. No, the latency is too long. So you know that you still have something there that needs to be tweaked, and it might not be, the frequency might be fine. The time it takes them to do the task might be fine. But the fact that it's taking them so long to get started is an issue, right? All right. Any question before we jump into ABC data collection? You're getting a lot of information in a really short amount of time. So please stop me if there's something, okay? All right. ABC data collection. The ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence. We had this particular course had a prerequisite of some previous courses. And so in those previous courses, we really went into the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, what they stood for, why they're important, right? The antecedent is whatever is occurring right before the behavior starts. The behavior is the behavior itself, the behavior of concern, right? And the consequence is what happens immediately after. Okay, so here we go. ABC data collection. A little bit about it and why it's so important. ABC data collection is what we really, really use to find the function, or to hypothesize the function. We'll say that. Because it attempts to explore a cause-effect relationship between behaviors, right? It attempts to say, why is this thing happening, right? And once we know the why, we know that we can start to make some changes. Once we know that unmet need, we know that we can start to make some changes, right? ABC data relies on qualified data. And what I mean by that is this: it's not about numbers. It's not like frequency where you say, okay, this happened 7 times in an hour. It's not frequency, it's not rate. Oh, this lasted 12 minutes, right? It's a little bit more of that intensity stuff. And it's more of just like naturally observing something and then giving the qualities of that data that you see. This was the setting information. We were in the living room. It was 6 p.m. Brother was there, sister was there. Like, you're giving more a descriptor type thing of the setting, of the container that you're in when you talk about the antecedent. When you talk about the consequence, you're talking about the response of other people and the response of the environment, right? ABC data does not prove functional relationships, and this is important. because as we work through this, what we're looking for is function, but we want to basically make our best guess as to what function is, so that we can hopefully help remove some barriers and teach some healthier behaviors that feel good for everyone. But they don't actually prove. We don't say this is the reason for that. They're not causal relationships, okay? But they do draw correlational hypotheses. Oh, this happens every time this happens. I'm not saying this causes this. I'm just saying there's some kind of correlation here, that this happens every time this happens, right? So that's your big thing about ABC, the science itself. Not going deep into each of the categories, because again, we did that in our prerequisite class. But here I want to talk about a little bit about ABC data collection in real life. What does it look like in real life? So the first thing that you want to do when you're doing any kind of data collection, right? Outside of when I get called in as a professional, I don't really want to know a lot of information, because I know that the information I'm getting has been filtered through other people's experiences and other people's perceptions, right? So I'm a little different. I want to go in and just be like, point me to the situation and let me have a look, and then I'll talk to you about what you've been seeing and what you've been feeling and what you've been all of this. Then we'll talk about target behaviors, right? I'm a little different. When you're doing this for a child at school or a child at home, I'm hoping that we're talking about a child that you have experience with, right? That you're aware of what is going on because you're the person there, right? So you want to identify the target behaviors that you're looking for before you really even start data collection. You already know, oh, this thing has been happening a lot. I haven't tracked it. I don't know how often. My kid's been throwing their food at dinner time. They've been swiping their plate. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens pretty regularly. Maybe I should look further into it. I know that I'm going to be looking at a target behavior of knocking the food off the plate, right? So I have some idea of what I'm looking for. So when I'm identifying the target behavior, this is what I'm asking myself. Are these behaviors that are disruptive to the environment? Whatever that environment is, whatever that container is that you're feeling is disruptive. Are these behaviors that are unsafe? Right? Are they safe, or are they just irritating me? These are things you need to know. And there's no judgment in either one of those, but it's something you need to know. Are these behaviors that are preventing social connections? Right? Maybe it's safe, but it's irritating me so much, or it's irritating their siblings so much that they don't want anything to do with them. Right? Is it preventing a social connection? Our kids need to and that happens a lot with our kids. When our kids who are exhibiting some sort of disruptive or unsafe behavior, it quite often is preventing social connections. It doesn't have to be just one of these. It could be all of these or a combination of these. Is it limiting their learning opportunities? Right? Or is it a behavior that's just taking up too much effort and time? Is it taking so long to do your homework that we need to put something in place? Do we need to track? And what would we track there, right? Probably duration. We would probably be like, okay, it's literally taking my kid 3 hours at night to do their homework. This is not okay. Do we need accommodations? Do we need to see are they just sitting there and staring off into space? We need to start digging in. But I need to know what that target behavior is first. And it should satisfy, some of these things here. If I'm just well, let's see, my kid is singing in the shower and I really don't like to hear it. And I'm being silly, right? But is it disruptive to the environment? Is it unsafe? Is it preventing social connections? Is it limiting a learning opportunity? Like, I'm just saying, find target behaviors that actually are impactful. They're impacting your life in some way, and they would be more impactful if we could get them replaced with something healthier, right? Just because something might annoy us or irritate us, it might not be where it just might. Sometimes behaviors don't need to be changed. Sometimes, like, that's totally fine. It might not be how I do it, but it's totally fine, right? So really look at these things right here. Okay. Naturalistic observations. This is the way that I really prefer to get my data. And when I get called in, the first thing I want to do is I just want to go and sit in that kid's classroom or in that kid's home, or give me a video, or right. There are all these different ways that we can do a naturalistic observation. It is basically meaning I want to observe this person in a natural setting. I have followed I have followed kids in so many places. I have followed kids in the community. I felt like I totally looked like a creeper in the parking lot of Walmart, right? Or like I have followed kids all over the place. As part of like, okay, this is what's happening in the community. I want to be able to take my child to a restaurant, but this is what's happening. I want to be able to go get groceries, but this is what's happening. Yeah, I've ridden the bus. I've looked at bus videos. I've done all of these things. It's basically, we really need to see what's happening in the actual setting, and not just have somebody tell us about it secondhand. We need to actual eyes on what's happening. So, naturalistic observation. You can do this in person. The big detriment to doing it in person is called observer interference. And it basically means that you, as the observer, can change the behavior just by your presence, right? We see this in schools when the principal comes in the room, right? And suddenly the kids are all like, oh, we're perfect now because the principal is here, right? The principal cannot do an observation of that particular thing because they create observer interference. It's the same thing at home. If like one parent is like, they always do this, you need to see this. And the other parent comes in and the kid's like, nope, this parent's here looking at me, right? Observer interference is a huge thing when you're doing in-person naturalistic observations. And so you just need to be aware if you are an observer that would be seen as an interfering factor. When I go into places, sometimes I have zero observer interference. Sometimes it's like if I'm going into one time I went in to see a kid in high school, and high functioning with autism, very focused on his world and what he was doing. And the team just wanted to increase his social opportunities, right? They just felt like he wasn't taking advantage of naturally occurring social opportunities. And so I followed this kid around. I observed him probably 10 times. I saw him in every class. I saw him in the hallways. I saw him in the cafeteria. I saw him everywhere there was to possibly see him. And when we got to the IEP meeting, he was in high school and he was present for the IEP meeting. And we're going around for introductions, and like I get introduced, and the special ed case manager said, oh, and this is Mr. Gordon. You've probably seen him around. And the kid was like, no. Right? I literally had followed this kid for probably 20 hours. But he is like, no, I've never noticed you. Right? I knew my observer interference was small. He was moving. I went in like a hoodie, and I probably had on a stocking hat and no glasses. I looked like somebody who just like of complete unimportance, which is what I'll do. I don't go in and try to look like the most important person there, because that's going to give me observer interference. I go in and try to look like the least important person there. Like I'm somebody's friend or boyfriend, or you know what I mean? Like relative from out of town, or I'm a nobody. when I go because I want to minimize my observer interference. But then I might go into a kindergarten classroom and I can guarantee you that an adult doesn't walk in there and fit in. It doesn't matter how many adults are in the room. If you go into a kindergarten classroom and you get yourself a chair and you put it in a back corner, at least two, probably more, of the children at some point, whether your observation is 5 minutes or 5 hours, they're going to come up to you directly and say, "Who are you? My name is, look at this." They will want to engage, right? And so your observer interference, you really have to think about, okay, how can I redirect without hurting anybody's feelings, but really get them to think that I am of no interest, right? So it's always something to think about, minimizing your observer interference. When I'm going into homes, it's a lot harder, right? And so because you're in somebody's home, they know when somebody is there that doesn't normally live there. You're going to have a higher observer interference, which leads us into, that was all in person. It leads into video. I have done one of the best in-home cases I was ever able to just really get great naturalistic observations for was this particular family had a live video. They had their home set up because their child had a lot of safety issues. And so they basically had a room where I sat and I could toggle between cameras so I could follow them wherever they went in the house, right? I had audio, I had video, and I could move the camera up and like literally in each area that they went. That completely bypassed the observer interference issue, right? That was beautiful. The limitations of the video was sensory. When I am in a naturalistic observation, it's not just about what I see and about what I hear. I'm also picking up, do I smell something here? Because we're sensitive to different things. Smell is a lower one that I don't usually get, but there are definitely times where I'm like, whoa, this is too much air freshener in this room. This is too much. Something is rotting over there. Y'all got to do something about that. Like, there are definitely things where you pick up on your smells. Taste is even lower. You don't do a whole lot, but temperature is a huge one, right? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? When I'm observing, I notice the temperature. Am I comfortable? Am I sweating? Am I cold? Do I wish I had a hat right now? All of these things are factors that I can pick up when I'm in a natural observation. There's also subtleties in lighting. So if I'm in a natural observation and there's like some really intense lighting or really dull lighting or something like that, I'm noticing that. But if I'm on video, I might not get that because the device that I'm using, the technology that I'm using, might be enhancing, right? It might be changing the lighting. It might be altering the sound. It might be eliminating background noise. It might be filtering that out. You know, some microphones do that. Some of your technology does that. Whereas if I'm in person, I know if there's something buzzing and it's low level and it's driving me nuts. And I know that's a piece of the variable, right? So there are some like limitations there. And also you're just limited by your technology. Like I said, this was a really sweet setup that I had with, this one particular family, but it literally might just be a laptop open to Zoom. And all I have is basically the square that you're looking at now, and it doesn't move and it doesn't pan, right? And I just like have a square. I don't even have a full body, or I might be set up in such a way that I can see the whole room with that laptop, which means I'm probably not getting great sound, right? Which I've had that before too. Like I might not have great sound. I can see what's happening, but I can't hear what's happening. Or I can't see what's happening off the edge. I can see the kid saying something, but I don't know who they're talking to because it's over there. So definitely some limitations there. And some benefits as with many things. Another thing is the recorded video is another way that you can do it. It also bypasses the observer interference. It has the beautiful piece of the pause and the replay, I've been doing some more consultations with getting recorded videos. And again, they have those same limitations. They eliminate the sensory. It's really, the technology really matters. Are you limited? Can you move that camera? Did the video get, what did the video get, right? And so, but the beautiful thing about recorded video is that if I'm just going through live, I'm also dependent upon how fast I can record what I see, right? And what I catch the first time around, what brought my focus the first time around. Whereas if I can watch that video again, or if I can pause that and rewind just a little bit and be like, oh, I was looking at this happening. Why did they do that? I see something happened right there that triggered this thing right here, right? So if you have a recorded video, that's beautiful. I definitely will have families who, you can't always get to something when it's naturally occurring. If I have a family that's like, my kid's waking up at 2:00 in the morning and they're doing X, Y, and Z. I have done things like that where I've been in a person's home at really weird hours, but it's not ideal, and in the course of like how the world is evolving now, it's definitely not ideal. And so I will have things where like parents will send me a video. And what will happen, unless the parent has set it up in such a way that it's basically a laptop and the kid doesn't know it's recording. If the kid knows it's recording, you're back up to the top at observer interference. Okay, if they know they're on camera, it's a different set of behavior than if they don't, quite often. Sometimes not so much, but almost always. And so when the kid starts doing something and the parent pulls out their phone and they start recording, it almost always completely changes what the kid does. Okay. So you just got to, unless they're like so deep into their tantrum or meltdown or whatever is being described to me that they've lost rationality and they no longer care. Okay. But if all I'm getting is a clip of that behavior and I don't know what came first, right? I'm probably just getting that clip if it's unintentional. Because if it's intentional, we're going to catch the antecedent. If we don't catch the antecedent, we can't do ABC data collection, right? And so what I'll typically do is I'll say, okay, when is this happening? When? Every morning they won't get out of bed. Great. What I want you to do is set it all up before you try to wake up the child. It's over there. It's recording. It's in the corner. Okay, now go through your morning routine. Go wake them up. Let me see what happens. Get a good recording. Respond like you always respond. Okay? So that I will know where we're starting. Right? So that's just a little bit on naturalistic observation. It's where you're getting your data from your ABC data collection. It comes from naturalistic observation. And so we're going to talk through just a little bit how to take what you see and turn it into actual data. We're doing okay on time. We're doing great. All right. What we have here is some samples, and this is already put into the format. When you do ABC data collection, you're going to have 3 columns. One's going to be the antecedent, one's going to be the behavior, one's going to be the consequence. The antecedent is what was happening, what was the setting, the setting, the environment when the target behavior began, right? The behavior is the behavior itself. What did that look like? And then the consequence is what followed the behavior. What was the response? What happened immediately afterwards, right? And so if you look at this, you always want to record. There are some things you always want to record. You always want to record the date, the time. Always. This is where you start to find some patterns, some antecedent patterns, which is like, oh, I record this over time, and I noticed that this happens every Monday morning, right? And sometimes it happens on Tuesdays, hardly ever on Wednesdays, and never on Thursday or Friday. I find that sort of information by writing the date and the time. The date I cross-reference with the day. When I start to look at my data and I start to try to find patterns in it, because that's the point of data collection, is to find patterns, right? I start to notice, was this on a Monday? Was this on a Saturday? Was this on a Thursday night? The time, is it always in the morning? Is it always in the evening? Is it always in that 1 to 3 p.m. time where it used to be nap time, but now they don't nap anymore? Is this when their big behaviors are happening, right? It starts to give me that extra information just by recording the date and the time. So I always start there. So here we go. Here's a little bit of scenario to think about. And this is it already recorded in the form. Okay. So at 11/17/21, I've got the date at 8:35 p.m. Right? If I checked my calendar real quick, I would know that's a school night. Right? That kind of thing. Jay was playing a video game before bedtime. His mom asked him to turn off the game and put on his pajamas. Okay, this is what was happening. I might want more information if I'm keeping this, if I'm the parent and I'm keeping this for myself, right? I might give myself just enough to know, to paint a big picture, just enough to trigger my memory. But if it's me and a parent is giving me this, I'm going to be like, okay, was he in the living room? Was he in his bedroom? Can you give me more about the environment, more about the setup? Are there other kids there? Right? I'm going to start asking more stuff. So you put as much stuff here as you need to get a full picture. If you're keeping this for your own child, you might not need as much here. But if you start to see that you're not making progress somewhere, you might want to put more here. You might want to notice, if it was dark outside, if it was still light outside. You might want to notice if there's still birds chirping out the window. You might want to notice if there's like construction noise on the street. Like you might want to notice these other variables. Anyway, he's playing a video game. Mom says, hey, turn off the game and put on your pajamas. Right? He says, no, loudly enough to be heard from the next room. And he keeps playing the game. That's the behavior. No. Or maybe he doesn't even look up. Maybe he's just like, no. And he keeps going. The consequence is what happened immediately. Mom walks over and turns it off. That's a whole entry. Right? Now we know it's not going to end there because something's going to happen next. So what we often see, sometimes ABC is just like ABC, done. At this point, I might say, if it wraps up and it doesn't roll around, I might put the duration in there. I might note that this lasted 1 minute or 2 minutes. If this goes on and on, I might note that it lasted 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? So we have that entry. Zooming down, look at the next entry. The next entry begins where the last entry left off because this situation did not wrap itself up nicely. Okay? So then what happens next is the antecedent is now the last behavior's consequence, or the last behavior's consequence is now the antecedent for this one. There he is, right? We know the antecedent. He's playing the video game. She walks over and turns it off. He screams, clenches the controller, and curls into a ball on the floor. That's the behavior. Mom walks over, unplugs the controller, picks him up, and carries him to the bedroom. Right? I'm making some assumptions from this in that Jay is small enough for mom to pick up and carry into the bedroom safely. I'm making that assumption. That's totally fine. Let's just say that Jay is 6. Let's pretend he's 6 years old. Which, honestly, a 6-year-old can easily overpower their mom when they are full on, right? I don't want to minimize the strength of a 6-year-old. But let's just say in this situation, he doesn't do that. She picks him up, and away they go. Right? I might want to know more information if I'm receiving it as a referral. I'm going to want to know, because that's how I am. I immediately think of 5,000 other things I want to know. I've been doing this a lot of years. This might be plenty for you, right? You're like, okay, let's pretend that you're Jay's mom. When I say Jay's mom, let's pretend that's you. I walked over and turned off the game. He was like, no. I am not going to try to peel it from his clenched fingers, right? But we're walking away from here. Like, I'm Jay's mom. This is what I'm thinking, right? I gave a request. We're doing it. I'm just going to unplug the controller. It's the path of least resistance. And away we go. We're not going to escape. So that might be you. You might be saying I walked over and turned it off. This is what Jay did. I unplugged it, picked him up, and we went to his room. Okay? This is the end of this entry. It might actually, if this is you in real life, go into number 3. Or it might be that you got into the room. He got down and put on his pajamas. Right? That might have happened. If I see this and nothing comes next, I'm going to have to be like, well, I guess he got on his pajamas. But if I have a number 3 that says, I did this, I unplugged the controller, I picked him up, I carried him to his bedroom, he continued to kick and scream or and I did this. You see how I can just keep going until the behavior wraps up. This right here probably lasted 2 minutes. If it carries on into the bedroom and I'm going more and more and more, I might have an entry by the time I'm done, the duration is 20 minutes. So that the naturalistic observation is really like, this is just what's happening here. You'll notice that I didn't put any feeling words, any of my feeling words. I didn't do any projecting of Jay's feeling words. And it's not that feelings don't matter. Feelings matter. Feelings are a variable. But when we're looking at ABC data, we want to try to find correlations between behaviors so that we can determine the why. If we start to say, Jay got angry and yelled, that got angry is completely subjective on my part. That is me telling you what I think is happening inside of Jay's body, and I have no idea, nor can I have any way of knowing or experiencing what is happening inside of Jay's body, right? I can say he scowled, he made a face. I can say Jay turned down his eyes and pursed out his lips and frowned. I can say Jay clenched his fist, right? I can say all of these things. I can say that Jay called me stupid. I can say that Jay said no. I can say all of these things that are just give me what you observed. ABC is about literally what you observed. If you cannot observe it, if you cannot see it, if you cannot hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, don't put it in an ABC form. Not saying it's not important information, but I'm saying determining the feelings at this point, it can just really get cloudy in there, right? So that's entry 1 for this. Entry 2 is in January. It's now at 7:15 a.m. Jay is playing a video game. I think already by now we can see, okay, I have an idea of where our target is. We're looking at a very specific target here. Jay's playing a video game while he waits for the bus. That tells me that the last entry told me that Jay was a relatively small guy. This one tells me that he's at least school-aged, right? He's preschool at least. So I'm guessing in the 4 to 6 range. He's playing video games. I'm hoping it's closer to the 6 range, right? Jay's mom asks him to turn off the game and get his backpack. So I'm imagining this. He's sitting there. He's doing the thing. It's not quite time for the bus, right? Turn off the game. It's time to get your backpack. No. And he keeps playing. Oh, look. I've only got 2 data points at this point, but it looks like a pretty common behavior is happening here. I'm already starting to see a pattern. What does Jay's mom do when he says no? She walks over and turns it off, right? Which I appreciate. She doesn't allow him to keep playing. She doesn't get in a power struggle right here. She just walks over and turns it off. But we saw from the other night, from the last piece of data, that he didn't necessarily give it up after that one thing. So let's see on this one. Here we go. She walks over and turns off the game, right? I would like to say, if at this point, after that first consequence, she walked over and turned off the game, if at that point he stood up and got his backpack and went, write that down, right? Don't leave yourself hanging about what happened next. If what happened was the thing you're looking for, go ahead and write it. Jay got up and got his backpack, right? But if he didn't and something else happened, you're rolling down into a next entry. And then the next entry is Jay's mom walked over and turned off the video game. Jay growled, right? Dropped the controller and closed his eyes. You can't see me, I can't see you, right? I can't see you, you can't see me. Jay's mom says, let's go, and physically prompts him to stand with a light touch on his shoulder, right? I'm starting to see some patterns emerge. I'm starting to see some patterns emerge in the antecedents. I'm starting to see some patterns emerge in the behavior. I'm starting to see some patterns emerge in the consequence. You cannot even start to say, I see a pattern. Like, there's a pattern. You need to have at least 5 data points. If I don't have at least 5 data points, I can't say there's a pattern, but I can say it looks like the beginnings of a pattern is emerging, right? At this point, I had 2 data points because this looks like one behavior, but you gave me 2 data points. A, B, C, that's a data point. Number one, number one, number one. That's the first data point. Number two, number two, number two. That's the second data point. Well, I had 2 data points on the one we just looked at from 8:35 p.m., right? I know that we're at different times of day. I know we're at different days of week, but I know that both of them involved video games. I know that he said no both times. I know that his mom walked over and turned it off. I know that he still didn't give it up and that his mom had to physically prompt him in some way. Right? So we continue. That's how ABC data works. Now I'm starting to see, okay, let's just see what's happening next. Here we go. Now I have one at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, I've had one late at night. I've had one early in the morning. Now I've got in the afternoon. Time of day doesn't seem to matter, right? So far. Jay got home from school, dropped his backpack on the floor, and turned on a video game. Jay's mom asked him to bring his folder to her, right? If you've ever had a school-age kid, this probably seems pretty typical. Hey, I need your folder. To which Jay responds, I don't have any homework. And he keeps playing the game, right? This time, mom yells back, bring it to me anyway, right? If at that point, Jay had gotten up and brought the thing, we're at the end, but he didn't. He says, now we're rolling into the next antecedent for our data collection. Jay's playing his video game. His mom says, Jay, bring me your folder. Jay growls, drops the controller, grabs his book bag, and throws it towards his mom. That's the behavior that happens. Jay's mom picks up the book bag, begins looking through its contents. Jay resumes the game. That's the whole data entry, right? Now, this really didn't quite match up the ones before. So now I'm looking at, okay, I don't have any emerging patterns for time of day. I only have 3 entries when I look at that way. I only have 3 data points for time of day, and I need 5. There's nothing there emerging for me. Right? So if it's like I have a school day and a school day and a school day. Okay, got it. Right? I've got some things like that. I have Jace playing his video game in all of them, and he refuses, even though this one says, Jay said, I don't have any homework, and he keeps playing. You can translate that to mean no, right? Just when we start looking at analyzing our data, which is a whole bunch toward the ends of these classes. Right now, we're just in the here's how you collect the data part. You're going to start seeing that sometimes things that look differently are really the same thing. And this is one of those places when Jay says, I don't have any homework, it still means the same as no. Okay? So, moving down, we're not going to get into whether or not we feel this is reinforced or any kind of judgment about what's happening here. Analyzing these things are a little further down the line, right? We're not quite to the class yet. All right. Rolling toward the end. This is a narrative. And so we're just going to read through the narrative. So the last thing tonight is, here is a narrative, and we want to look at this narrative and kind of talk our way through how I would take something that I see that I might write a paragraph on, or I might get a narrative from someone. How do I take what I'm actually viewing and turn it into these examples we just said? First of all, you're going to start your page with ABC data. And when I say that, I literally mean get yourself a piece of paper, write ABC on it, and make some columns. Okay? That's how you do this. And then you just need a pen and you're good to go. Right? So here I go. I've got on February the 22nd, it's 2:30 in the afternoon. On this one, I know that this narrative covered 20 minutes because it says it went from 2:30 to 2:50. This whole event that I'm about to talk about went from 2:30 to 2:50. It lasted 20 minutes. All right? So we've got Jay's playing his video games. A quick check with my calendar tells me that this is a Saturday. We're on the weekend. It's 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. He's playing his video games. I just realized the huge error in this is that it's February and we should change the word hot to cold. Okay. So we'll get that. I'll switch it up on you guys. Jay's playing his video games. His mom asks him to turn the game off so they can go to the park. And then she walks out of the room. Right? I'm sitting there. I'm observing. She comes in. She's like, hey, turn that off. We're going to go to the park. And then she walks out of the room. He keeps playing the game. About 10 minutes go by. He's still playing the game. She comes back in. She tells him again, turn that off. We're going to the park. He continues to play, but he's like, I don't want to go to the park. She's like, you need to get outside and play with your friends. It's too cold. It's too cold. And other kids are stupid anyway. Right? He keeps playing. She's like, you're going. You're going anyway. You're never going to have any friends if you talk like that. Turn that off and get your shoes on. He keeps playing. She walks over and turns it off. Right? Since we were talking about latency, we were talking about delays, we were talking about that sort of thing. Basically, he got to continue accessing that for like 15 minutes after she told him to turn it off, right? That's important when we start talking about our programming. That piece of duration data is important when you're recording it on your ABC form. So she walks over, she turns the game off. He turns it back on. She's like, turn that thing off, we're going outside. So then she turns off the game and she pulls the plug. He screams and begins to cry. And now he's just kind of in a little meltdown. Right? But he's no longer playing the video game. So then she says, come on, we'll get ice cream on the way back. Okay. Up he goes, starts putting his shoes on, and they roll. Right? A lot happened here. We're looking at multiple ABC data points. And so it is a little hard when you're in, let's pretend that right now I'm Jay's mom. And I need to record this incident. And I currently need to take Jay to the park right now, right? It does make it hard. And so we want to hit the highlights and we want to remember as much as we can, right? We want to check the clock and at least get the duration. We want to know antecedent. It was a Saturday. Jay was playing a video game. Right? Mom asked him to turn it off to go to the park. Behavior, ignored her and continued playing the game. Right? And so consequence on this first part is really important. Some people would say none, but there was a definite consequence. She left the room. Mom left the room. So the consequence was Jay got to continue playing the game. If the consequence was mom left the room, that's important for our planning purposes. When we start looking at places we can make some adjustments, this is one of those crucial places. So then that comes down to the next one is Jay's still playing the game. She asked him to turn it off. Behavior, keeps playing and says, I don't want to go. Consequence, mom responds verbally. Mom says, we need to go outside and play with our friends. That rolls down to the next consequence. We're now on data point 3 from this one narrative, right? She's like, you're going. He's like, it's too hot. It's too cold. It's too this. It's too that. Kids are stupid. I'm going to say anything I can possibly say to try to convince you that I would be so miserable going to the park that you let me stay here and play this video game. Right? The behavior itself is all the same, right? We see that he's giving us a vocal and we see that he's passively refusing by not getting up and going, right? So then the consequence is, what's the next thing? Eventually, Jay's mom turns off the computer. That becomes the antecedent. She turns it off. She pulls the plug. He screams and begins to cry. And then the consequence is Jay's mom says, let's go, we'll get ice cream. Jay's mom says, let's go, we'll get ice cream. Jay gets up and goes to the door. They leave for the park. Right? That all gives us incredibly valuable information when we break it down like that. ABC data is going to take us to the function, which is what we're going to work our way through in the next 3 classes. How to get from here's what I saw, here's what it means, how to get to here's what it means, to what can I do about it. Okay? So that was a lot of information. Any questions at this point? All right. So that's it for tonight. We will get this wrapped up and sent out to everyone. Just a reminder that I would love to hear back from you if you have feedback, if there's some class formatting that you would prefer to be changed or tweaked, if there's If you want to email me directly, that's fine. If you have feedback you want to leave on our Facebook page, that's great. Yeah, anything you want to give back to us. So, otherwise, I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you next week.